Well, welcome everybody. I'm excited to present. This is one of the most favorite things I do for Save Our Schools. And I think this is a really important presentation because not only do we need to know the facts, and I know I recognize so many names, so it's good to see so many people I know, but also some new names. It's such a complicated landscape, educational landscape here in Arizona. So just kind of keeping track of the facts can be tough. And then taking it that next step and talking about how, or figuring out how to actually talk about the educational crisis in Arizona is really important. So just a quick overview of what education looks like in Arizona. So about 72% of our kiddos go to district public schools. That's the school right in their neighborhood. About 20% of students go to charter schools. And in Arizona, charter schools are fully publicly funded. So sometimes you'll hear, oh, 92% of Arizona families choose public schools. And that's why, because we combine the district and the charter because they're all fully publicly funded. And then about 5% of kids go to private and another 3% are homeschooled. So these are some of the things that we hear a lot. People will say, well, I support parents and I support school choice. And so one of the responses to that is, well, so do I. And as a parent, I choose my public school. And that's what 92% of Arizona families do. And that's our first priority, is to be, should be, needs to be, to adequately fund those public schools. So another fact to kind of keep tucked somewhere in your brain is we are in the midst of a big crisis now, and we have been for many of us at Save Our Schools the whole time our kids have been in public schools here in Arizona, but it wasn't always that way. So if you look here at this chart, in the 90s, we were kind of middle of the pack. We were in the 30s for per pupil spending, and then you see that downward decline all the way to 49th. We did get a little more funding a couple years ago in our public schools, and it was over $1 billion, which sounds like a lot, but it really was not enough to move the needle. It moved us just one notch up to 48th, and we want to see, we know our kids deserve much better than to be at the bottom of the barrel. So, every year we spend, Rachel's getting the slides back up. The way that our budget works, and given how underfunded our schools are, we really are about $5 billion behind every year. And I know those numbers are so huge, it's hard to wrap your brain around it. But in Arizona, our per pupil funding is around $10,000 compared to the national average, which is 15,400. So we are significantly below that. And Arizona students are really only funded at about 2/3, 66% of that national average, which means that we are $5 billion behind our peers. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like in our classrooms.
Do you want me to jump in here?
Sure, yeah, jump in.
So yeah, as a teacher and a mom and an Arizona native, I started hearing this way back, right? And started to go and figure out what's going on. And one thing we keep hearing over and over, I heard it just the other day in Yuma, is that there is too much misspending, right? You start getting it blamed on the district's administrative costs. But the fact is that, Arizona spends nearly the least in the nation on our schools and administration. We've got some of the lowest administrative costs in the nation. And that means that our schools don't get the best programs, they don't get the best resources, and that funding is slashed for those things that we love the most, right? Art, sports, when we think of our time, my kids are in high school right now, Friday night lights, all of those things become, start getting cut. And so, this whole idea of misspending is just absolutely false in our public schools and public districts.
So let's go to the next slide, because here we talk about the impacts of that chronic underfunding. So what does it look like in your schools when every single year there are billions of dollars underfunded? And so what that means in Arizona, and those of you who have kids and grandkids in school, you know that we have the second most crowded class sizes in the United States. And we are among the lowest in teacher pay. And so for those of you who teach, and Raquel, maybe you can you can speak to this since you are in a classroom right now, but if somebody comes to you and says, hey, we need to just put 5 more kids in your class, like what does that do?
Well, what it does is it just puts another weight on your head on top of everything else that's weighing you down. You know, teachers are already underwater. Our class sizes are some of the largest in the nation. We have, you know, one of the highest teacher turnover rates in the US. I keep talking about this because it impacts me every day, but we went on fall break, and when we came back, the ELA teacher for our 5th grade didn't return. She went and did something else. So we feel every single one of those, you know, things that they want to do. You know, when you don't have a teacher, your teachers are doing sub rotations. We have these huge class sizes, a lot of needs from our students, a lot of behavioral issues. You know, we've just come through a pandemic. And right now we've got 1 to 650 counselor to student ratio, which is the second worst in the nation. And that's an improvement from a few years ago. We lack nurses, we lack librarians, we lack, again, counselors. Our arts and sports programs are underfunded. We've got broken ACs, broken down buses, outdated technology, computers, outdated textbooks. And we could add to this, right? If we started a list of, you know, all our teachers shared what's lacking in their schools and their districts, it would be a mile long. So we could go on. And as you're feeling it every day, you start to, you know, lose hope. But that's one of the reasons that I've been with Save Our Schools Arizona, because I'm learning every day and it gives me a little bit of steam to keep going. So we'll go on to the next slide. And I'll, you know, I can talk about this one. You know, we hear about our failing, you know, public schools, our failing government schools, and that is just absolutely false. So despite the chronic underfunding for years and years and years, K12 schools are performing NAEP scores. We're scoring at the national average for grades 4 and 5 in both reading and math. And Arizona had the 3rd best growth in 4th grade reading in the US from 2011 to 2022. We just got this report back, and 95% of Arizona public schools scored an A, B, or C in 2023, despite everything that they are facing. And less than 1% of Arizona public schools received an F rating. So, you know, this whole idea of failing government public schools is absolutely false. We're getting
Well, and
into
you just think
performing miracles. Go
you
ahead.
just think if we were actually funded in a way that did right by our students, can you imagine how well our students would be doing under the
Imagine.
tremendous pressures that our teachers face, and they still manage to do right by their kiddos?
Right. And so as we, you know, look at these scores and as we look at these reports, you know, we really want to share those because we continue to hear, you know, at different places, you know, we'll hear, well, you know, fine, the schools in my neighborhood are maybe doing okay, but, you know, I keep hearing that they're teaching whatever you want to fill in, right? They're teaching, you know, pronouns, or they're teaching all kinds of, you know, CRT and all kinds of nonsense. You can fill in your buzzword there. But again, as somebody who is in the classroom, we know that our schools are teaching 21st century skills, solid academics. Teachers are incredible, you know, facing what they've been facing. Our schools need investments to teach what we support: good, solid academics. You know,
Yeah.
all this other, you know, false narrative kind of spin, you know, machine that's been happening. We've got to say no to that and say yes to what is actually happening in our schools.
And I think the other thing to note here is that we know our schools are subject to their local school boards. We know what they're teaching. We know how much their teachers are making. We know, you know, it's very accountable, very transparent. And so when you hear those buzzwords being thrown around a lot, I think it just indicates that those folks are just kind of buying into all that stuff that's going on in culture around CRT and things like that. So I think it's important to know that our public schools are really transparent on all levels.
Right. And just one more thing to add there is that a lot of these groups, spreading all this false narrative, these false narratives aren't even from the community, right? That we knew that there were just these groups that were kind of going school district to school district, but the people in the community, the people, that actually live in these neighborhoods know that our public schools are doing an incredible job with what they've been handed.
So I do think it begs the question of why is this happening? Why are our schools in Arizona so underfunded? And where is this attack on public schools coming from? So another thing I think it's important to know that it's not just happening. It's a very well coordinated attack on public education, not just in Arizona, but across the country. And it really is coming at us on multiple fronts. So we definitely see it in terms of attacking teachers, deprofessionalizing teachers. We see it a lot in terms of attacking administrators. People will say, oh, why do we pay our administrators so much? When you actually look at the data, we have some of the lowest paid administrators in the country. We see a lot of these tensions showing up at school boards. We see people running for school boards who don't have kids in public schools, who don't like public schools. That's happening. It's a coordinated effort with some groups like Moms for Liberty who are doing that. You may also have seen just recently these no campaigns on bonds and overrides. And bonds and overrides are an important way that our public schools supplement their funding, oftentimes for some really basic resources for their schools. And there was a really coordinated effort to have a no, to try to convince people to vote no on these campaigns for bonds and overrides. Most of our bonds and override campaigns were successful, but not all of them were. And this is really all this narrative about public school, government schools are failing, and our teachers are teaching CRT. All this stuff is really being pushed by the same bad actors. And if you look in that little picture, the little cartoon in the lower right-hand corner, you see the people sort of brick by brick taking apart the public schools and putting those bricks over into this nice and sturdy private school. But the goal behind these bad actors is really to dismantle and privatize our public schools. And I think at first, many of us in Saver Schools thought, oh, it's terrible people are doing this. We did not get just how coordinated these national efforts are and how much Arizona has really been ground zero for some of this stuff.
So yeah, one of the things that we keep hearing is that parents aren't happy with the public schools. Bad stuff's going on in there, so they're standing up for their rights. And as a parent of kids in public schools, that's not what we're seeing. I work with lots of parents. The way I got into this was being a part of the PTO, and parents work tirelessly. They dedicate their time, their efforts, to get the money for their students. To try to get the money that is not being provided for their students in school. And I see very few people. Our board, our board meetings are public. You can go there. As a teacher, we are always begging for volunteers. I can speak to this. We had our PTO meetings in person, then we went online, and we still had very few people, coming to these opportunities. You can volunteer at your school at any time. There's multiple opportunities, but the people that were actually showing up to these things were not parents. And it really made me wonder, where these people are getting their information, right? The people that actually live in these communities are not seeing the same thing. And so, again, it's a small group making a lot of noise that is, getting out there. So that's why this kind of gathering is so important, right? So that we get the right messaging that we can all amplify out there about what's really happening in our schools.
So here is a list of the main organizations, some specific to Arizona, some national organizations pushing to privatize public education and go to a full voucher system. So you'll see a couple names you probably recognize, like Moms for Liberty, our very own Goldwater Institute. We've also have Americans for Prosperity, which is a national organization, but they have a state-based group. We have the Libre Initiative that lobbies Latinx families. Turning Point USA has moved into Arizona big time. So I love to talk about this stuff, and I would be happy to talk in more detail about it, but we do have another presentation. We have some blogs on our website that go into a little bit more information on these organizations and on the role that they are playing to dismantle public education.
And we kind of went back and forth as to whether we wanted to share all, so many of them, but
Yeah,
it's just good to get the, because look at some of the names, right? Yes, for kids, you again kind of look at the way that they've been marketing this and coming at this. So it gives you an idea of what we're up against. So, a lot of you might already know this, but we always like to go ahead and go over this what is one of the tools that they're using to defund our public schools, and ESA vouchers are a tool that they are using in a very effective way. ESA stands for Empowerment Scholarship Accounts. These are public taxpayer dollars that are issued by the Arizona Department of Education to parents via a little debit card, a private account. And these can be used for private school, micro school, and homeschool expenses. So remember, not charter schools. But one of the things that's so concerning is that they can be rolled over year after year and used for university and community college, which is something that I learned a while back that I could not wrap my brain around. And you all have been seeing it, or maybe you haven't, but the things that they can buy with these debit cards and that are being approved are mind-blowing.
Yeah. So just look at this enormous growth of the ESA voucher program in the last couple of years. So you see in 2012, just little by little from 2012 to 2022, the ESA voucher program grew incrementally. And that is because it started just for special ed kids with really highly specialized needs. And that's kind of how it was originally sold to our legislature. But then every year they expanded the eligibility categories until finally in 2023, the program became universal. And that's where you see the skyrocketing costs that are really now approaching almost $1 billion, or we expect them to approach $1 billion next year. A lot of this money was completely unbudgeted because they were told by our joint legislative budget committee that in the first year it would probably be about 33 million, and it was over 500 million. So there are just a lot of unbudgeted, unaccountable costs associated with this universal expansion. So speaking of those costs, here's a little clip from ABC News. And if you haven't seen it, prepare to pick your jaw up off the floor.
Arizona's ESA director, John Ward, sat down with me to discuss allowable expenses and the approval process. Among the $2 million in music expenses, we found some people buying pianos for their homes.
These are absolutely allowable. Now, if it was a luxury piano, some type of grand piano, baby grand, we may not approve that as a luxury item.
Not luxury pianos, but what about learning to drive in a luxury car? A Scottsdale company does that. ESA paid for 77 kids, averaging more than $800 each.
Should our tax dollars be going to a family so their kid can learn how to drive in a Tesla?
So while you may think this may not be a good use of that family's ESA funding, at the end of the day, they get a fixed amount of money. And if that's how they're going to choose to use it, that's their prerogative. And
their prerogative runs the gamut. Here's what ABC 15 tallied. $3,400 spent on a single transaction at a golf store. A nearly $10,000 transaction at a sewing machine company. 34 purchases at a company that sells food freeze-drying appliances. More than 100 passes to the Snowball Ski Resort, more than $350,000 spent on Ninja Warrior training centers, trampoline parks, and climbing gyms, and more than $1.2 million on martial arts instruction.
The vast majority of purchases that are coming through are completely allowable.
I think we really have a right to know what's happening here.
Beth Lewis with Save Our Schools has campaigned against ESAs, but ABC 15's data analysis is the first time she's seeing aggregate numbers on what ESAs are paying for. And Lewis says this shows ESAs are not equitable.
It shows what a two-tiered system this is for haves and have-nots, right? Like the public school kids have no resources and are really, really struggling. And then these families can use vouchers to pay for jujitsu while the rest of us pay out of pocket.
She says taxpayers and voters will question whether ESAs are wasteful.
They do not want to pay for a piano in everybody's living room when they can pay for a piano in a local high school that serves 400 kids a year for 20 years.
So there you have it. I couldn't say it better than our executive director, Beth Lewis, said there in the video, but I think it's really important for us to know how that money, our taxpayer dollars, are being spent. And so what we hear from the other side is, well, parents should get to choose how to spend their tax dollars. And plus, these purchases are legal. And when you see the list of what those purchases are, just because they're legal or allowable, does not mean it's a good use of taxpayer dollars. And those are our public dollars. So it's better and more efficient and more equitable to use those monies to pay for a school to have these things rather than to pay for every individual family to have them. And I think the example of the piano is a really good one. It seems so common sense that we wouldn't be having individual families buy pianos when so many of our public school kiddos don't have access to them, or if they do, they're sharing it with classrooms full of kids.
Yeah, and all of this is sold right on the school choice. We've been hearing about school choice and it sounds so great, right? We all want choice, but the reality is that it's the school's choice. Private schools don't have to accept vouchers. They choose their students. This is one of the things that got me started before I even knew what a voucher was. I live in Central Phoenix. I looked into a private school for my twins for kindergarten. We took a little test and it was a walking distance from my home, literally down this cute little path. And I thought, oh, this will be great. We can afford to pay for this. And they said yes to my daughter and no to my son. And that's when that idea of school choice came crashing down around my head. And I thought, but I chose you. And they didn't choose me. It's school chance, right? It's that you take the chance that they're going to choose you. And, not surprising, Arizona private schools serve far fewer students of color than public schools. So who's doing the choosing? ESA vouchers rarely cover the full cost of attending a private school. So low-income families are unable to make up the gap. If you have, we know that some of our finest private schools are $20,000, upwards of $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 a year. You've got about an average of $7,000 on your ESA voucher. Who's going to be able to make up that gap? Certainly not low-income families. It's people who can already afford to pay this tuition that are now getting a handout. They're also not choosing our LGBTQ students, special education students, English language learners. Another thing people don't know is that ELL students lose their federal rights. And these students, LGBTQ special education students, EL students lose their federal rights and protections once they take a voucher. A lot of these things are in the teeny tiny fine print that they don't like to talk about when we're talking about school choice.
And the thing I should have mentioned when we were first talking about ESA vouchers, and especially the universal program, our vouchers in Arizona range from about $6,000 to $40,000, depending upon the needs of the child. The universal voucher program is basically just a $7,000 check to anybody who asks for it. And so one of the reasons that has cost the state so much money is kids who are already in private school, their families, regardless of whether or not their family makes millions of dollars a year, get handed a check for every kid of theirs in a private school, a $7,000 check. Okay, so we've thrown a bunch of facts at you and so much information, I know, but now we're going to kind of switch gears and talk about how to talk about this stuff, whether it's the person behind you in line at the grocery store or one of your neighbors or your legislator. So we will turn it over to Lita.
1 second, real quick.
Okay.
I will turn it on over to Lita. Lita is our social media manager as well as one of our East Valley coordinators. Before we dive into this topic, there is another short little video on a concept that we call the Overton window that folks may be familiar with, but it's such a good little video. We'll take just a couple minutes to watch.
The Overton window is a model of policy change, and the Overton window describes one big thing. Ideas that are inside the Overton window are ideas that are politically safe. The public is ready to accept them. But ideas that are outside the Overton window are ideas that might be too radical for the public to accept. And any politician who supports ideas that are outside the Overton window today risks finding himself getting defeated in the next election. Anything that changes the public's perception of an idea can shift the Overton window. Things like think tanks, the media, entertainment, a crisis, or historical events. Anything that gets the idea out of the open so that it can be discussed and debated has the potential to shift the window. The Overton window doesn't always move in just one direction. For a public policy on alcohol, for example, we have the Overton window moving toward less freedom when prohibition was enacted. The consumption of alcohol was made illegal because the public was fed up with the social problems caused by very high alcohol consumption back in those days. When people saw the effects of prohibition, however, they decided that the law that they thought they wanted, they weren't too happy with, and so the Overton window shifted back and prohibition was repealed, so the pro-prohibition forces overshot the Overton window. Policies where the window is shifted toward more freedom would be women's suffrage. Clearly, that's an area of more freedom today than it was 100 years ago. And in an even shorter period of time, many of citizens' rights regarding firearms have shifted in the direction of more freedom. There's a common misperception about the Overton window, and that is that politicians themselves move the Overton window. That's backwards. What politicians are good at is detecting where the Overton window is and reacting to it at any point in time. The Overton window cannot tell you if a policy is good or bad. What the Overton window does is tell you what policies are on the verge of possibility. Ideas that are near the edge of the Overton window, but just outside of it, may be tomorrow's policy reality.
Okay, so just a little bit about that. What is this Overton window? Well, it's this idea of what is it that's policy or being talked about in the public sphere or the public square, as we like to say, that is popular or gaining traction. These are some recent headlines nationally that we're seeing about vouchers, and the conversation is shifting right before our very eyes. And here at Save Our Schools, we have been a part of that shifting conversation because we talk to press often, but even more than that, because we are constantly talking to others, talking to people in our own communities here in Arizona, but also throughout the country who are folks who are fighting these very same fights that we are. And so we can be a part of that shift in our conversations with others. And it's not up to politicians to make these changes. This is something that we actively participate in if we're willing to take that step to share that information and have these conversations with others. So I'll turn it over to Lita to give us some more information.
Hello, everyone. I am Lita. I am social media manager and East Valley organizer with Save Our Schools. And I am also the parent of 2 kids. My son graduated last year, having never attended a fully funded school in Arizona. So I am super passionate about this. Another thing I'm passionate about is social media and how to use it in a good way. There are lots of negative things about social media, but there are amazing things about social media and how we can change people's way of thinking and who we can connect with through social media that we may never connect with otherwise. So I'm going to go over a little bit of that with you. We shared a lot of great information. How are you going to share that out? So let's start with basic do's and don'ts. Sometimes it can be hard to do some of these things, but it's really important to keep them in mind, to talk to the right people in the right way. So number 1, don't argue or debate people. You may start having a conversation in good faith, but once you realize that it's not, just stop. It's not worth it. It's going to accelerate their message. Try not to sound condescending or judgmental. People don't know what they don't know. And the more we can inform them and give them information in a positive way, the more likely they are to listen to us. It can be easy to think, oh, these parents are taking advantage of a system with the ESAs, but we are all parents. We all want what's best for our kids. So let's try to avoid attacking parents. Let's focus more on the big people, the privatizers that are coming into our state, that are not individuals. We don't want to treat teachers and students as victims, right? We are advocating for them, but we are advocating with them as well. They are our partners in this, and they are not the victims. Try not to cast blames on individuals, groups. Talked about this just a minute ago. If parents are not our enemies, the big dark money private groups from out of state are. And then, of course, legislators that listen to those dark money interests rather than us. Things that you can do, some positive ways to influence people. Tell a story. Make it personal, what you're comfortable with, but make it personal. Share with people why teachers, students, education is important to you. If somebody comes back at you, you can listen to them. You may learn something from them that you didn't know. And often we can hear what they're saying and we can use our stories to find a commonality. And when you can find something in common with somebody, they're much more willing to open their mind and listen to you. That goes with validating concerns. If they say something that's just totally off the wall, pivot and at the very least, just leave the conversation. And this goes for whether you're in person, whether you're talking to somebody online, whether you're talking to a friend or neighbor. We don't always agree with our family or with our friends. So you know when to walk away from a conversation, and then always talk about what's possible. We all have dreams, ideals, imaginations for ourselves and for our kids. And that's something you can find in common with just about everybody. And I kind of went into some of this as well, so I'm not going to dive into every little bullet point here, but many people just don't know, or I have run into so many people that are totally misinformed. And I read their comment and I'm like, oh, this person, but I'm going to respond with factual information in case somebody else reads it. And that person will come back and be like, I just didn't know. And they were very open to what I shared. So having the tools and knowing what to say to people is really important. And we gave that all to you, right? So now that you know the information about test scores and our schools with A's and F's, you have information that is based on data that you can share. And there's nothing better to combat misinformation than facts. As I mentioned, there are people that want you to waste your time. Don't waste your time on them. If you know you're never going to change their mind or convince them of anything, 1 or 2 comments in, you can usually tell, just stop. It's not worth arguing with them. You can flip. As we talked about in the first one, the parents are not our enemies. Like, we can find something in common with all parents, right? We all want what's best for our kids, or at least the majority of us do. And ESA program is out there. People are going to use it. Unfortunately, there are some people taking advantage of it in not great ways, but we have a way to change that. And that is through our legislators, right? And combating dark money. We're not going to fight that battle parent to parent one-on-one. So that's not who we want to be engaging with on an individual basis. We want to combat the real enemies. As we mentioned, tell a story, make it personal. I always share with people where I come from. I used to be a 3rd grade teacher. I was born and raised in Arizona. I have been homeschooled as a child. I have attended public schools. My children have attended public schools. I've seen the education system in Arizona for 44 years of my life from different different views. And it really allowed me, when we were doing petitions, it allowed me to talk to some people that were negative and see things in a different way. I had people recording me and trying to get me to say certain things, and that never came to fruition because I was able to talk to them and share my experience. And when you share your experience and you make it personal, people, for the most part, are going to be more open-minded and not attack you on a personal level. We love our students and our teachers, right? Students are the center of everything. Teachers are there because they care about kids and they care about the future. And we are there, we are doing this for the same reasons. Our goal is to make sure that our students have the funding that they need and our teachers have the resources they need for our students to go out into the workforce and be well educated and contribute to the state and to this country. When you are combating this disinformation, it's very important to clarify, like we use the word villains, who it is, like who is doing this. It's people, dark money coming from out of state, trying to privatize our schools and trying to undermine parents, right? 92% of parents choose Arizona public schools. So that's a fallacy that that parental choice is only ESA vouchers, when that's only 8% of our kids that are going to private schools and homeschooling. Raquel's going to share a little bit of her personal story, a way that you can share, an example of what you can share.
Absolutely. So, yep, I share my story all the time, and it really is, the reason that I'm still in here. So, when people ask me, or if I'm, knocking doors or talking to people, I always tell them I'm a teacher, I'm a mom, and I'm concerned about the funding in our local public schools. I see firsthand how the lack of investment is making our teacher retention crisis worse. I make sure to say it's a teacher retention crisis. It's not a shortage. We have plenty of teachers that are certified. We just have trouble retaining them in this profession that is not respecting them and treating them so poorly. And then I give an example, for like the example that I shared earlier, that I'm still feeling the repercussions of every day. The language arts teacher at my school didn't return after fall break. And our lawmakers are not doing enough to prioritize our public education. We need to do something about that. Are you willing to help? Are you willing to jump in? We can really look back and see the examples of what our legislature was focusing on, and really that puts the fuel in my tank to say, that is not what you should be focusing on. You should be focusing on our public schools, our communities, that are in desperate need. And so, everybody can do something. So I always ask, are you willing to help? Can you jump in? And seeing how many people are here today makes me hopeful that there are people out there willing to help, that are willing to just do one thing, two things, take a step forward of something they haven't done. They can do that today or tomorrow.
Absolutely. So how are you going to use social media to advocate? And like I said, I have been apprehensive about social media in the past, but I've had some personal experiences where I have been able to connect with people that I would never be able to connect with in real life. And that goes both for my personal life and through Save Our Schools. We have made connections with many people on different aspects of social media, and our message has spread far and wide across the country. And it's amazing to see that cohesiveness with other states and being able to talk to each other and support each other. So keep in mind, some very important things to keep in mind when you're on any social media is whatever you say is out there. I tell my kids this all the time. Whatever you say or you post is out there. Even if you delete it, somebody could screenshot it. So just be really aware that whatever you're saying out there, anybody can see it, right? And even if you delete it, it's there forever. So I think that's something to be really conscious of. Sometimes it's really good to kind of just take a step back, maybe type up your response, put it in drafts, or think about it for a minute, or maybe have somebody else read it and then post it. If you feel like you're really emotional or really frustrated by something, sometimes that's not always the best time to respond. But when you're passionate about a subject, you want to respond. Don't just not do it. Like we mentioned before, provide links to evidence or screenshots or personal experience. Make sure that you are sharing what you know. And if you don't know, reach out to one of us and we are happy to give you the information or share that with you. be positive about public schools rather than negative about other things. It has a huge impact, even if you just say a positive thing about a specific school or public schools in general, an experience that you had. We want to make sure people know that not only are our public schools performing as far as the test scores go, but that they are really encompassing our community and they're making us and our kids feel welcome. Every comment, like, share, even if it's just an emoji, it boosts every post in that algorithm. So as a social media manager, this is my own little plug. Anything you can do to push us into algorithm, like we said, we make connections across the country and people are looking to Arizona since we are the first to have universal vouchers. So I would love it if you guys would do any one of those things on as many posts as possible. What is the purpose of commenting on your social media? You want to create dialogue with others, right? We can't educate people or bring them into our circle if we don't talk to them. And so it feels a little different behind a keyboard than it does in person, but it has the same purpose. You want to personalize it and make connections. And then also you might see your comment might lead to a waterfall of other comments and people are like, oh my gosh. Often in this world, you know, we might sit in our house all day on social media and sometimes that feels very lonely, but it doesn't have to be. It can connect us with people, like I said, that you might not otherwise connect with, and correcting misinformation is hugely important. There is a lot of it out there, even amongst people that agree with us. I keep seeing people posting about ESA dollars going to charter schools. That is not true. ESA dollars cannot go to charter schools. So do it in a positive way, do it in a nice way, informative, but it's great to correct that misinformation. So then people are learning and not saying the incorrect things, continuing to say incorrect things. You may think people know things, and I fall into this a lot as a person because I'm obviously connected to the education world a lot, but I always have to remind myself that a lot of people don't know, right? I can't assume that they've seen a post that I've made or that I've shared. So you want to be purposeful about it, but share it and spread it out to people that you may think may already know, or that you may not know, that you may be able to bring in. And it's always good to be purposeful on that. And we talked about misinformation, disinformation. There's a lot of it out there. So any help we can get with that is amazing. We just had a post recently about a $500 terrarium being purchased with ESA dollars. And some people came on and were talking about how, well, when they were a kid, their classroom had a class pet. And that's apples and oranges, right? So then somebody else went on and responded, well, your classroom may have had a class pet, you know, but that was paid for by the teacher. It's not the kid getting to keep the pet and the terrarium and all the one kid, right? Like, even if you get to take it home over breaks, that's not the same thing. So little simple things like that. And that doesn't even take a link or anything. That's just personal experience you can share and dispel disinformation. Yeah. So why should you be on social media? Now, I know some people are apprehensive, and we are on all social media. If you saw that first one, we are on Threads, we are on X, which used to be Twitter. I still call it Twitter. We are on Facebook. We have YouTube. We have TikTok, and we have Instagram. And we share across social media. We generally share a lot of the same information because we know different people like different social media platforms in different ways. However, there are some things that we'll share on one or two, but not the others. So I highly encourage you to take a look on all of them. But the most important reason is that's where people are at. Our legislators, if you haven't been on social media, they're on there, especially on X still. A lot of people thought that was going to die. It has not. Our legislators are there. They are actively spreading information, sharing information, or sharing, even some are sharing our information. So it's a really good way to interact with them, either to get ideas to them or to combat their disinformation. One important point, though, is please, if you see disinformation that they have posted, rather than retweeting it, the best thing to do is take a screenshot, because when you retweet it, just like I said, every comment, like, or share boosts our algorithm, then it boosts them into the algorithm. So you're pushing it to more and more people if you do that. So the best thing to do if you feel like it's something worth sharing is to take a screenshot and share it that way, rather than retweeting it or commenting, liking, so on and so forth. So 3 big things we want you to walk away with today. We're almost done. I know this has been long, but I hope it's been valuable to you. Our Arizona legislature, the leaders in our legislature have failed Arizona kids. Our schools are funded 48th in the nation and have been around there for almost 2 decades. We are nearly $5 billion behind the national average every single year. School funding is extremely important. I know we had a conversation in the chat about, school funding and test scores, but there is so much more to school funding than test scores. It's the arts. It's my daughter's playing soccer, and you would not believe the amount of money we have to fundraise for her varsity soccer team because we don't have the funding from our state to pay for them to travel to their games and stuff. It's amazing. We have to raise, as parents and asking the community, $10,000 just for this year for that soccer team to be able to survive. Anyways, chronic underfunding is robbing children of an education. So we know our schools provide so much more, like they provide food, they provide busing, so many different things. And so funding is important to all those different things. The more funding our schools have, the more our kids will benefit. And then vouchers are specifically designed to dismantle our public schools. They are one of the tools aimed at privatizing education. We know that vouchers are inequitable and unaccountable. We talked about how a lot of that money is going to private schools, private religious schools that parents were already paying for. And by next year, they're expected to siphon away $1 billion from our public schools. And I just think about what that $1 billion means to the 92% of kids that go to Arizona public schools. My daughter's in high school. It's unlikely that she'll ever attend a fully funded school, but my hope is that we can change that for the future.